it's hard for me to understand not pursuing the goal, right? And some days when you come in here, when you come in to train, you come in to do anything, when you do your job, right? There's days where you don't want to be there. And sometimes it's just a matter of building that routine, building that habit and saying, I'm going in today. Even if I just have to go through the motions, I'm still coming in, I'm making this a habit. This is something that I do every day. And it's really hard to not get good when you do that.
Hi, my name is Trevor Carlson and I'm the host of The Formula, where we break down the elements of achievement, health, wealth, and happiness with guests from all over the world. And today, I have with me the head instructor and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt.
My name is John Gutta. I'm the owner of Tipping Point Brazilian Jujitsu, and we're going to talk about my journey in Jiu-Jitsu and the importance of hard work both on and off the mats.
Let's do it. This episode of the Formula Podcast is brought to you by Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is a daily green supplement that comes in the mail. It's a subscription-based product where one scoop is your daily Athletic Greens. Now, if you know me, I've been drinking green shakes almost every day for the last couple years, and recently just got started on Athletic Greens. And it's pretty awesome because all you do is you take the scoop and you put it in your blender bottle or your shaker, and you have your daily advised greens right in one bottle of water. So I highly recommend checking out Athletic Greens. If you check out the show notes or head over to our website, The Formula Podcast, you can check out our sponsored products there. Now, our second product for the day that this episode is brought to you by is a product called LadyBoss. And LadyBoss is a women's supplement company that they have all kinds of products, right? And now I'm sure you're probably thinking, Trevor, you've never taken LadyBoss. It's a women's supplement company. You're right, I haven't, but I know a few people who have. I'm working on getting them on the show to share their experience taking this product, so they can give you their opinion and their experience taking LadyBoss. Now, if you'd like to check out LadyBoss or look at any of their products that they have, you can check out our show notes or head over to theformulapodcast.com and check out our sponsored products there. Now, back to the show. John, thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. So we were talking a little bit before about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and how a lot of people might not know that much about it. So can you go into a little bit of detail of like what Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is and a little bit of background on it?
Sure. So it kind of got popularized in 1993. So I'll set the stage. It's UFC 1. If you ever seen Bloodsport, it's just like that. There's a big kumite. So the UFC, this was the original thing in Denver, Colorado. They invited these martial artists from all of these different types of martial arts. You had a sumo wrestler, you had a karate fighter, you had a guy that did judo, you had a boxer, you had everything. And they pitted these martial arts against each other. And they tried to do it in a way where there weren't any rules. They tried to make it as limited as possible. You weren't technically supposed to eye gouge, you weren't supposed to bite. That was about it. And if you were to look at this lineup, right, the lineup of people that were doing this tournament, the one that kind of was out of place was this skinny little Brazilian dude. So he's about 6 feet tall, 170 pounds, and his name was Royce Gracie. And he won. He ended up winning the tournament, but he did it in a really unique way. Up to that point, when somebody thought about fighting, you usually thought about like punching and kicking, right? They got popularized by Bruce Lee and Chuck Norris in the 70s. And you didn't really have a good frame of reference. Maybe you thought about boxing, that kind of thing. you definitely didn't think about grabbing somebody and kind of dragging them to the ground. And that's exactly what Royce Gracie did. Everybody else was probably well over 220 pounds. He was outweighed by at least 50 pounds in all of his matches. And he was able to kind of, in a way that nobody really expected, drag these guys to the ground and then incapacitate them with either a choke or attacking the joints. So he would basically put himself in a position where if they didn't submit, then their arm would break or something like that. So that kind of started the ball rolling. And in the early days, Jiu-Jitsu was mixed martial arts. So everybody that was successful at mixed martial arts did Jiu-Jitsu. And since then, it's kind of evolved on its own. But that's been kind of the starting spot for Jiu-Jitsu to grow and spread across the United States. Back in 1993, maybe there were a handful of Americans practicing Jiu-Jitsu in only the major cities. And now in basically any city of 50,000 across the US, there's some type of Jiu-Jitsu gym there.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing on YouTube, there's like the Gracie tapes, is that what they're called? Mm-hmm. Where it's, I don't remember who told me about them, but I checked them out and they're just like the Gracie brothers doing like their competition. What was it like if somebody could come in and fight them and win, they got like 10 grand or something like that?
Right, so basically, what happened is a way to kind of promote their gym. So the origin, why is it called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? So there was a guy that did judo that moved to Brazil, and he worked with this individual with the last name of Gracie, and he had 2 kids. And a way to like pay him was to teach his kids some judo. Well, the story goes that one of them was kind of sickly and weak. He ended up being 150 pounds as an adult, not super tall. And the judo that he learned, and judo is more kind of focused on throwing somebody, and then there's some elements to being on the ground, attacking chokes and joint locks. The Helio Gracie, that kind of the sickly child, had trouble being able to do that. He wasn't physical enough to be able to pick somebody up and throw him. So he really got specialized on being able to be effective on the ground. That burgeoned into a business, so they started teaching Jiu-Jitsu, and it was originally called Gracie Jiu-Jitsu, and then that kind of spread around Brazil, and then a tool that they used, they would take out ads in the Rio newspaper, and they would offer $5,000 to anyone that could come in and in basically a no-rules fight in a gym just like this, beat the instructor. And then they would film them, and this was going on probably well into the 90s at any like Gracie Jiu-Jitsu gym. And then they would film them, and then they would use them as promotional material, showing how their Jiu-Jitsu or how Jiu-Jitsu worked against other martial arts practitioners or just tough guys that were trying to win $5,000.
Yeah. There was a couple that got a lot of steam. There was like somebody that won. Was it like Mr. Universe or something, came in and tried to fight one of them, and the Gracie, whichever Gracie brother it was, probably was no more than like $180 maybe, mm-hmm. And this guy was a monster, and he got destroyed. It's something that's worth watching if you're into martial arts for sure. But.
Yeah, definitely. So I, for a little while, taught a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu course at the University of Iowa, and one of the projects was to basically, after the students had had 6 weeks of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, explain what the Gracie fighter was doing in those matches. So they would go on YouTube, they would watch those matches and explain, basically using the techniques that they learn in class, what exactly they're doing.
Yeah, I'll link to some of them if anybody wants to watch them, because it's entertaining if nothing else, because it's just fascinating. So I kind of want to divert to how you got into Jiu-Jitsu yourself, because we talked some about that before. But how did you being from Iowa and West Virginia, get into Jiu-Jitsu?
Yeah, so as a kid, I was obsessed with professional wrestling. All I wanted to do was be Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior, and I would get in trouble for professional wrestling my 5-year-old friends and jumping off of the couches and all of that stuff growing up. And then, basically, slightly after I stopped believing in Santa, I found out that professional wrestling wasn't real. And then there was a void in my life for a number of years. I usually filled it with video games and soda. So I didn't really play any sports. Had you asked my parents when I was 15, if I would be running a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym and in shape, they would definitely not think that. I was probably 300 pounds in high school, had never done a sport before, and then I saw The Ultimate Fighter. So it's this reality show that the UFC put out. And I was probably a sophomore, junior in high school, and I thought, wow, that's real pro wrestling. This is like the coolest thing I've ever seen. I want to do this. And then when I was looking for colleges, I found that the University of Iowa had started a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program. That's one of the main martial arts and mixed martial arts. So I was set. There we go. I'm going to do that. And then over those next 2 years, I dieted really extensively. When I got to college, I was down to 170 pounds. But I was kind of like a Bambi, right? I hadn't I had a body, but I never had an opportunity to really use it before. I didn't really play any sports. So it was a really kind of unique transition that both of my parents definitely never would have saw it coming.
Yeah, and then from there, you eventually transitioned into training other people, correct?
Right. So the landscape in the Midwest for jiu-jitsu was definitely a green field. There was very, very little jiu-jitsu in the Midwest, and even in the United States. So I started training in 2006. And typically what would happen is in the major cities with warm climates, the Brazilians would move up. The more decorated Brazilian competitors would move up and then start academies. Well, Iowa's climate is a lot different than Rio, and we didn't attract a lot of those folks. So the Midwest had been kind of a vacuum for jiu-jitsu. When I started, there were maybe 2 academies in the state of Iowa with practitioners that weren't black belts in jiu-jitsu. They were kind of purple belts, so that's kind of the mid belt in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. So when I started, there was virtually nothing around. There had been a couple people that had trained for a couple years at the place where I started at the university, a couple people with some random experience, other places. But quickly, I fell in love with it. I started training 5 times a week within the first, few months. And, very quickly, I became one of the senior members at that team. And then a few years later, an opportunity arose at Militage Fighting Systems, which was a really predominant mixed martial arts gym, and I actually took a role in teaching at that for about 5 years. And that was, basically my part-time job, or a little bit more than my part-time job in college, was either teaching jiu-jitsu or driving down to the Quad Cities where Militage Fighting Systems was, and training and teaching jiu-jitsu down there.
Yeah, and you do, and now you're competing as well as teaching people, correct?
Right.
Yeah, and you have, and I'm going to get this right, you have the nationals coming up.
Right. So this week, tomorrow I fly out for American Nationals. So it's a kind of a fairly big tournament. So I'm excited to be able to go out there and test my jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. What do you think the most exciting part for this competition is for you?
So it'll be interesting. So I haven't had a lot of opportunity to compete at black belt. Usually it's been kind of regional events, so some of the bigger events in Chicago, and I've done pretty well. So this will be an interesting test to kind of go at that national level of event and test myself against, especially at black belt, against people that could have been doing this twice as long as me. They could have had their black belt sometimes as long as I've been training. So it'll be interesting to see how that kind of that dynamic works on a bigger stage.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you. I'll be cheering you on via via social media or something while you're out there. So hopefully it goes well for you. I imagine it will, judging by how I've seen some of your students do. And when we were on the first take, you were talking about your girlfriend.
Right.
She just took second in nationals, right?
Worlds.
Right?
Yeah.
Damn, I'm gonna get these right one of these times.
No, so it was really cool. So every year we go out to the World Championships. It's in Long Beach, California. It's at this venue that it's this big blue pyramid. They call it the Walter Pyramid, and it's some University of Long Beach, something like that. And a lot of the times, we always made the joke, it's where dreams go to die. For most of the people, right, that walk into it, I mean, almost everybody loses, right? You can only have one winner in these divisions, and sometimes you have 100 people in these divisions from all over the world that come in there. And so my fiance Claire, started training, has been extremely consistent. A very good natural athlete and an extremely hard worker. And then we've been going for the last 5 years. And even the first time we went, I thought there was a chance that she would be able to win. Every year we came back, we get pretty deep in the division. We maybe would lose, we'd get a few good wins, and then we lose to someone, another high-level competitor. And then this year, she was actually able to take second, which is a huge accomplishment. She was making the joke that all the referees were speaking to her in Portuguese, because nobody that isn't Brazilian is that deep in a division, especially at a higher belt level like a brown belt. So it was a really kind of cool experience as a coach to watch my student, my athlete, be able to be from a smaller gym in the Midwest and be able to compete at that international level. So
that's awesome. Congratulations.
Really cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you'll be taking the podium again here in the next week or so.
Yeah, we'll see.
There's got to. I had Dan Gable on, man, that was almost a year ago. I had him on, and we were talking a lot about wrestling, and one of the questions I asked him about some of the wrestlers he's coached was, what are the things that, like, some of the best wrestlers that he's coached, what are their traits, what do they have in common versus the wrestlers that maybe just don't quite get to that next level. So I guess in jiu-jitsu, what is it that allows the practitioners in your gym, your students, to go from, in here working out every day to, like, getting to that point where they're consistently stepping up on a podium, whether that's regionally or nationally?
So I'll preface this by saying that I am no Dan Gable. Dan probably has some more astute observations than I do in terms of coaching. I mean, there's, I would say, grappling coach that has the credentials that Dan Gable does, and a lot of the coaches that I've had over the years really look up to his style, and I think that hard work is something that he's proliferated through not only wrestling but any type of combat sport. When I was down at Militage, everybody was there was the disciples of Gable, down there. So I definitely have taken a piece with that. I think jiu-jitsu is a little bit different than wrestling. So in wrestling, you are trying to dominate your opponent, and you have a very limited tool set because you're not able to put your back on the floor, right? And so a lot of the time it's head-to-head, and that was the style that Dan became famous for, the Iowa style of kind of getting in your face, being aggressive, wearing you down, outworking you. And jiu-jitsu, there is an element to that. You definitely can. But there's a lot more opportunity to outsmart your opponent because a lot of the times, like, one of the catchphrases about jiu-jitsu is they call it the art of yielding, right? And that kind of goes into its roots as a martial art, right? The reason that Helio Gracie started doing stuff on the ground is it took a lot less physicality than being able to do it on the feet. So it lets a smaller person kind of get out of the way, or a weaker person get out of the way. Now, it's not magic, but that adds a really kind of significant element to approaching Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu that gives a lot of that leads to a lot of range, right, in the way that my competitors are successful. So I have some people that have a very aggressive game. I have other people that are basically waiting for you to come to them. They kind of set traps and wait for you to wade into them. I have other people that do a really, really good job of getting you to fall into their rhythm, their tempo, that kind of thing. If I were to say anything, though, the number one characteristic of somebody that's successful, not only in jiu-jitsu but in life, is hard work, right? Without putting in those 10,000 hours, you're not going to be good at anything. Anybody can walk into something and have a little bit of limited success, but once the water starts getting deep, that doesn't happen anymore. That doesn't continue to work.
Yeah, I feel like there was something where didn't Tim Ferriss try to do, like, the whole He's known for like hacking the system basically. Like, I mean, he did that with like Tango, I think. Like
Right.
he won like the Tango world title or something like that. I feel like he tried to do that with Jiu-Jitsu too, but I can't remember for sure.
Yeah, so actually one of his friends is, I'm blanking on his name, but is a black belt and was the chess prodigy. He was the Chasing Bobby Fischer.
Yep, I know the name. I've read the book, or his book. Yeah.
Anyway, so he's The Art of Learning is a great book.
Yep. Yeah. Josh Waitskin.
There we go.
Yeah.
So Josh is a black belt under Marcelo Garcia, who is one of the highest, is a Kobe Bryant, a Michael Jordan of Jiu-Jitsu.
Right.
And Josh kind of has I think kind of set Tim up on a process to be able to try to learn it quickly and efficiently. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if how deep down the rabbit hole Tim got. I think he started, but he had a few injuries and kind of went and chasing some other ventures. But I know he definitely trained and has kind of a basic understanding of Jiu-Jitsu.
Yeah, there's somebody else maybe it was Scott. He brought up. He's like, yeah, I think he said that Tim Ferriss was trying to find out if you could like learn the skill sets quicker. But and what he found was there's like not necessarily a way to do it immediately. It's just like, you just have to have a ton of reps.
Right, and that's definitely, a good coach can cut that down, right? And so a lot of the times, I'm constantly learning jiu-jitsu for me, but at this point, the marginal increase that comes from me training is going to be very incremental. And I have to really kind of search out resources that help get me better. But over the years, we went from, jiu-jitsu is such a weird martial art because 20 years ago, nobody knew anything. The positions, that Royce Gracie was winning UFC 1 with are positions that I teach to my students at the university, right? In a 6-week class, they're able to identify every move that he did. So jiu-jitsu has evolved so much since then.
Yeah.
So what you do a lot of the times is you have coaches that are able to kind of hack the quickest way possible to get successful in jiu-jitsu. The problem that comes along with that is that you end up kind of making clones of yourself. So if you happen to have the same body type as your instructor, you have the same physical attributes as your instructor, they're really good at showing you how they cheated the system,
right,
but not necessarily the optimal way for your body type, your psychology, your whatever, to be able to figure out jiu-jitsu. So what ends up happening is you have these schools that teach jiu-jitsu and it's like, we're teaching you French cuisine, right? And they get you good at teaching French cuisine. But a lot of the times, you have a student that's just not gonna learn French cuisine. They're gonna be, they're making fajitas in the corner, right? So a lot of the times you'll see people be really successful with that, but most jiu-jitsu schools kind of teach it as a buffet, right? Where you have a little bit of everything. You try to figure out what works best for you and your coach does that too. That said, a lot of the times at the beginning, at the fundamental level, you're running into things that are gonna be universal, right? So like, to continue down the path of that analogy, like knife skills are universal. Doesn't matter what kind of food you're cooking, you have to have those basic set of knife skills that's gonna pay dividends later on. So right now, for me, my goal is to try to optimize that for my students. Okay, what are the absolute fundamentals, regardless of your body type, that are going to help you be successful and are gonna pay dividends long term? And help you be able to get competent enough to be successful early enough to get that positive reinforcement when jiu-jitsu has such a steep learning curve. It takes a long time to figure out how to move your body effectively. So for me, that's my goal as a coach. But even if you have the best coach in the world, it still takes mat time.
So let's say you have a new student that walks in the door and they want to get started training. What does that process look like for them? You don't have to go into like the technicalities of like, I'm going to teach them a single leg, or I don't know enough about jiu-jitsu to give you the technical terms anyways, but what does that look like when you start working with them?
Sure. So that, I'll comment on this first. This is a process that's really changed.
Yeah.
So when I first started training, it was interesting, and it was probably what made it so difficult for jiu-jitsu to grow, is that jiu-jitsu was still in a phase where it was trying to prove that it worked to everybody. So anybody that came in the door you were trying to show them that it worked, right? Which leads to a not very welcoming environment. Like basically you're beating people up, not beating them up, but I mean you're showing them how effective jiu-jitsu is by putting them in submission hold after submission hold after submission hold and making them realize, oh, this martial art works. At this point, it's a much kinder and gentler sport. And when people come in the door, it's definitely not, that type of environment. And that, varied, from place to place back then, but that was kind of the old school mentality. Now people understand that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu works. And so for us, the biggest thing is we want to know what your goals are, right? And what your background is. So what we do is we do an introductory private lesson. You're going to fill out some forms and it's going to kind of gauge, okay, what's your athletic background? What are your goals with Jiu-Jitsu? What, have you moved for the last 10 years? So we have students that come in that have, some of them are very overweight. Some of them have had a desk job for the last 20 years and haven't done a sport ever or since high school. And so what we do for those individuals is going to be different. And how I will coach those individuals is going to be different than somebody that is a state champ wrestler who is 18, who wants to start doing jiu-jitsu because he wants to be a fighter, right? So understanding what people's goals are and what their athletic background is going to be really important for us to be able to gauge where they're going to best fit. Everybody starts in the same spot, so basically we'll do that introductory session. They'll do some basic movements, and then we'll be able to gauge, okay, you're able to move effectively, or okay, we're going to have to work on these issues. And then they enter our fundamentals program. And then once they have built up a competency to be able to move effectively on the ground and their body has adapted to it, then we bump them up and they can go into the all levels classes and start to work up from there. A lot of the times I would say the number one issue that we run into is people fall in love with jiu-jitsu, but their body can't handle it yet. So for me, I remember when I started jiu-jitsu, I was kind of in a unique place. So I was young and I had lost, a ton of weight, but I didn't really know how to move my body. I hadn't done anything really physical for forever. And so I remember, when I first started, like my arms would be black from bruises, right? Because you don't think about that, like people getting, you're just touching, they're not like pinching you, but you're just not used to that type of contact. And it takes a little while for your body to be able to adjust to that. So a lot of the times we have to kind of say, okay, we understand that you are, you've fallen in love with jiu-jitsu, that's great. Let your body have some time to adapt, and then start going 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, and then start adding things on top of it. So it really is going to depend on who we have coming in the door. So that initial consultation will help us kind of understand that. A lot of the times this can be a venture for somebody that was really competitive. They played a college athletic sport, whether it's wrestling, baseball, whatever, and they don't. In normal everyday life, you don't have an outlet for that. So for those folks, they're going to be able to move very quickly. Once they are able to understand how to move around the mat, their body's going to adapt really quickly. They're going to have very fast progress. Somebody that has never done anything before, it's going to take them a little bit longer just for their body to get used to it and kind of go forward like that. So it's one of those things where it's really based on your goals. And I pride myself on having a jiu-jitsu school where everybody is able to pursue their goals. I think a lot of the times you'll, a lot of businesses, they say find your niche, right? You have this demographic that you're catering to. And that was something that I felt like I had a unique experience with when I was in college, because I had, I started at the University of Iowa at this club, and there were so many different types of people there. The first person that taught me jiu-jitsu was a cardiothoracic surgeon, right? My best friend was getting his PhD in math, applied mathematics. He works for some think tank in Virginia now, when I was an 18-year-old freshman. And we had so many different types of people all coming together and having this, building this community on the mat that you wouldn't get in at least anything else that I had ever done. That's something that I really think is important to do at my school. So it isn't just for competitors that are trying to train as hard as they possibly can. It's not for kids necessarily, just that. There's not a clear focus. I want to cultivate an atmosphere where everybody's able to pursue their goals and we're all able to get better together.
Yeah. So let's say that you have your, somebody that's becoming a regular practitioner, and they want to move from that, just coming in and practicing, just because they want to get better at jiu-jitsu, and they want to move into that competitive landscape or to that competitive level. What's the process from going from a daily practitioner to being a competitor?
So a lot of the times, the beauty of jiu-jitsu is that it's very honest.
Yeah.
So a class typically looks like me teaching some techniques, you're drilling them against a non-resisting opponent, and then you have what we call sparring or rolling. And what that is because we're not hitting each other, right? We're just grappling, right? It's like wrestling in pajamas, and instead of trying to pin somebody, you're looking to submit them with either a chokehold or some type of joint lock. We're able to do that in basically full speed, right? And so you're going against a resisting opponent, which is incredibly valuable for a self-defense situation. I'm going on a little bit of a tangent there. But in terms of making that jump, I start to notice and they start to notice when they're starting to do well for their belt, right? And sometimes they need a little bit of extra encouragement. If I start to see them really starting to put things together, I'll say, hey, have you ever thought about competing? A lot of the times I'll push that out more to the newer students, because if they don't start early, then a lot of the times they get scared and they don't ever, they don't want to do it once they become a little bit more tenured. And so I'll, throw that opportunity out to them, suggest, here's some things. And basically, my recommendation is just mat time, right? It's, okay, you have this tournament, you're going to do this tournament. I want to see you in here 4 days a week. I want you to, make sure, what's your weight look like? Because jiu-jitsu is a weight class-based sport. So, okay, we're going to see what your weight's like. You may have to lose a little bit of weight, that kind of thing, so that you set yourself up for success. Longer term, though, I have a lot of students that don't compete, but they're in the room, they're training hard, and it just really depends what your goals are. A lot of people are do jiu-jitsu as a fun way to connect with other people in the community, to get a great workout in, to build some really interesting, fun friendships with some, unique people. And other people are here, to compete, and other people are here to lose weight. It's a really interesting group of people. I have the head of the ER in town is a student. I have an individual that's 72 years old and has been training in the last 10 years with me. He still gets on the mats and rolls with people that are 18 years old. I have lots of law enforcement officers. I have lots of engineers. I have soccer moms. I have it just really runs the gambit.
Yeah. So this is more of a question on maybe your approach to preparation for competition. When someone's preparing, typically athletes have unless they're like LeBron James or something, right? They have some area where they excel in and other areas where maybe they're not quite so good in. So I would totally give you some jiu-jitsu examples if I knew what they were.
Right.
But do you tend to have people focus on their stronger areas and just kind of double down there? Or are you looking to kind of help them become a well-rounded competitor?
Almost always the answer is to focus on your strengths. And I think that holds true in life too, right? So unless your weaknesses are really holding you back and are stopping you from accomplishing some type of goal, a lot of the times if you go towards where you're strong and start to really develop that, that's where you're going to be unique. That's a skill set that's going to be unique to you, that's going to make you special and be able to beat these other people. So a lot of the times, there's a couple famous jiu-jitsu quotes I always throw out to my students. So it's better to be good at one thing than suck at two. That's a famous Carlson Gracie quote. A lot of the times in jiu-jitsu, you see this. You think of understanding and knowledge as being an encyclopedia, and as a coach, that's valid, right? But as a practitioner, that doesn't matter. The famous quote from Bruce Lee is, "I fear the man that has practiced one kick 10,000 times than a man that has practiced 10,000 kicks once," right? So to be able to develop mastery at something, you have to do it every day and get really, really good at it. That's when you're going to be exceptional at competitions, that kind of thing. And I mean, there's definitely elements where, we have to make sure that you're not completely a glass cannon where you have a really strong attack but you'll fall apart as soon as you hit a little bit of adversity. But for the most part, I'm going to say let's make your offense as good as it can be, and then round out the rest of the skills to a certain extent. But there's no reason for us in a 5-minute, 10-minute match to focus on your weaknesses. You don't have to be able to play left-handed. Play right-handed all the time.
Yeah, that's actually a really good analogy. It's like you don't have to learn how to play with your left hand if you're the best with your right.
Right.
So let's talk about the mental game a little bit.
Sure.
Going into competitions in front of a crowd and against somebody you've never participated against before is probably a lot different, I would assume, than just like rolling around competing against classmates. So how do you walk people through the process of preparing for that? For those competitive matches, mentally?
It really, really depends on the person. So I typically overcorrect. I have a tendency to be a little flat, to not not have that adrenaline rush, or the way that I deal with that adrenaline rush is like nonchalance, and treat it like it's something in the room. And a lot of the times, that's something that I've battled with, is kind of tweaking that. Do you get really excited? Do you get really amped up? Do I keep a really low energy level? So that, really varies. For me, I'm kind of like gearing it where I have to say, okay, I need to get a little bit more amped up than I normally am. For students, it really varies as well. Some people, they don't want you there. I mean, so I'm there to coach, and I do a really good job within the match of guiding them through a match. But some people completely, they get in their zone, they listen to the headphones, they do their thing. Other people, you have to pump them up, otherwise they come out flat, like me. Other people, they can be like a ball of anxiety where you have to talk them down and say, you do this every day. This is no different than anything. If this person came into the room and you were going to train with them, what would you do there? And that's something that is, it's this like exercise in psychology that I had no idea I was signing up for as a coach, that has been really, really interesting, and it's something that I'm still, trying to figure out exactly, where each individual needs to be, and that's going to vary not only based on their psychology, but based on what they do. So in jiu-jitsu, you have people that literally go out to competitions, get something, and then lay down, right? And their whole game is based on yielding to the other person and setting up traps. For those folks, they don't have to be very amped up. If they're amped up, it's an opportunity for them to make a mistake. Yeah. You have other people that come in like a wrecking ball, and if they were to come in flat, like what makes them successful is their aggression, is their physicality. If you have those people come out flat and second guessing themselves, then you're in for a lot of trouble. So it varies based on an individual's psychology and their game, where you want their adrenaline levels at, what you want, how you want their mental state to be going into a match.
Yeah. So you said you like to come out more flat.
Well, I don't. I tend to, I guess, is probably the best way to describe it.
Does that mean that you're more of the type of, if you don't mind talking about this,
sure,
your strategy is more to kind of wait for the other person to come to you? Or would you describe yourself as more of an aggressor?
So jiu-jitsu is kind of a funny thing, and over the years my body type has changed. So I went from someone that kind of set traps and waited for people to come to me, because when I started jiu-jitsu, I was skinny, had never done a sport before, wasn't very strong, wasn't, that, like, my tool was my brain. And so I would set those traps, and I had the flexibility, because I'd never done anything before, I didn't have muscle like stopping me, to set those traps and lay back and wait. As I've gotten older and kept doing jiu-jitsu and started to recognize the value in, strength and conditioning, that kind of stuff, I've become a lot more physical. but I still, a lot of the times, have that. I still act like prey versus a predator. You know what I mean? Like and so sometimes I don't recognize like, oh, all I have to do is be aggressive, and then everything will fall into place. And additionally, I've lost some flexibility from having an office job, so my hips aren't as flexible, so it's harder to set those traps and be on the defense for me. So it's an interesting kind of situation where I found that optimal, or at least in my perception, optimal level of where I think I need to be going into a match, that headspace. But over the years, my game has changed where I have to retool that and figure it out and kind of focus on some different strategies that are still outside of my comfort zone. So it makes it's still fun to go out there and compete because I'm still learning and still trying to figure it out for myself.
So it sounds like it's kind of an adaptive process as your body changes or you change on your skill level. I mean, it might be easier to be more aggressive too now, because since you're a higher level belt than you were at that point in time too.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah, that's got to be interesting too, to just be, I don't know, it almost feels like it's kind of it becomes almost a chess match.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of the times, like, jiu-jitsu is very, very often compared to chess, except you're doing it with your body, and the goal is to dominate the other person, right? So for me, the reason that I got interested in jiu-jitsu, I love strategy games. I played a lot of video games as a kid, and so for me, what made this intriguing was that I'm going to outsmart my opponent. And that's what makes jiu-jitsu an effective martial art, is that you're able to outsmart your opponent, especially if they don't know anything. But at the end of the day, jiu-jitsu is not magic. And so if you're doing jiu-jitsu against somebody else that knows jiu-jitsu, they know what you're doing. So then it does a lot of the times come down to physicality. And so that typically happens further down the road, right? So that is definitely like an adaptive process to kind of understand both the chess match side of things, and then recognizing that you have to mold your own chess pieces too, and you have to make sure that the reason that you're not winning is because you have these chess pieces that don't lift enough weights and don't they don't develop their body. So that's an interesting element too. And honestly, for me, one of the biggest reasons that I transitioned from like video games and that kind of thing is that they're both really fun, right? I'm mentally stimulated, I'm engaged. The benefit of jiu-jitsu is because you're using your body, okay, I get a workout in there. Okay, now I'm like, for my long-term health, I'm getting exercise, and I'm losing weight, and I'm doing all of these things that help me kind of stay in a positive lifestyle. So my undergraduate degree is in economics, and so it has positive externalities, right? So I'm getting lots of benefits outside of the reason that I'm doing it, versus video games, where I have a lot of negative externalities. I don't get out in the sun, I drink a lot of Mountain Dew, I don't have a lot of friends, that kind of thing. So for me, that transition was like, oh, I found something that I can really dive into and be obsessive with that is paying dividends in other aspects of my life too.
Yeah, it's almost like a real life RPG. Right?
Exactly.
The more time you put in, the better you get.
Yep.
So you've been training for
12 going on 13 years.
Yeah,
yep.
Okay. So decent amount of time. So if you had to start over, like let's say tomorrow you woke up and you were just starting over brand new, how would you work back to where you are today, skill-wise?
It's interesting. I would be incredibly difficult to coach. So I don't know that it would really, work. I mean, definitely, I spent a lot of time, because the landscape was so green when I started that a lot of my time was spent with the blind leading the blind, or I was learning my 10,000 kicks instead of practicing my one, and so I spent a lot of times doing like a move or like 30 different variations of a move versus like, okay, I've learned this move, now it's time to connect the next piece together. Because we weren't just trying to make ourselves better, we were also trying to figure out jiu-jitsu and be able to teach it to other people. So it really slowed down my process because I I didn't have access to that information or that type of coaching where I was able to say, okay, this has already been done. I was reinventing the wheel a lot and looking at other people's wheels and saying, oh, their wheel's a little bit different. Is that the better way to do it? I'm going to stop doing whatever I'm doing. And it made things a little bit slower. That said, I don't know how well I would have listened. I've done pretty well in a position where I'm able to kind of pilot it myself, and that's one thing that's made it really fun and engaging for me. So I don't know that I would listen to my own advice if I were to go back and restart it. But if I did, it would definitely be, to find out. I mean, back then there wasn't that opportunity, but if I were to come into my program now, it would be listen to your coach. Your coach knows what they're doing, and they're going to, basically try to map the quickest path for success.
Yep, and it's probably finding the right coach for you too, I would imagine.
Right.
Because it's probably not a one size fits all.
It's hard to say, too, because there's not a ton of money in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, so there's not a ton of Jiu-Jitsu schools in every location. So it's, it varies. Sometimes you do see, people switch teams to learn from somebody different or to be able to engage in this different training environment. So I definitely think that, there's definitely some truth to that, but a lot of the times as a practitioner, you're not gonna have that choice. There may be one or two options available locally, and one of them might be closer to your house, and a lot of the times that's going to be, the fact that you get mat time is going to be more important than you going once a week to the best place, that's a 4-hour commute, So it really depends on, the individual student.
Yeah. So if you had to lay out like let's just call it like three, I hate this term, but let's just call it 3 keys to success for like a successful career in, if you want to call it career. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not sure what the right term is. A successful practice?
Okay.
I don't know. In Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, what would those 3 keys be? I'm assuming one's hard work, but I'm not sure what the other 2 would be.
Hard work is definitely one. Consistency. If you want to do something, and you're saying that this is a goal, it's hard for me to understand not pursuing the goal, right? And some days when you come in here, when you come in to train, you come in to do anything, when you do your job, right? There's days where you don't want to be there. And sometimes it's just a matter of building that routine, building that habit and saying, I'm going in today. Even if I just have to go through the motions, I'm still coming in, I'm making this a habit. This is something that I do every day. And it's really hard to not get good when you do that. I mean, it's exceptionally hard. You have to approach it in a really mindless way for a really long time to not get better. It's just hard to not get better when you do that. So I think not only being willing to put in that hard work in kind of bursts is important, but just being able to consistently train, right? You said this is your priority, this is something you're passionate about. Okay, consistently train and having faith in that consistency. So a lot of the times, just like life, you may not, the fruits of your labor may not pay off directly and you may not see them happen. A lot of the times you have latent learning in jiu-jitsu where you work on a movement, you drill a movement, and then it doesn't work for the next 2 years, and then all of a sudden you have this aha moment, and then you're able to do it at an extremely proficient level because of all of those reps in the past. You just didn't have the tools to be able to get to that position before. Same as, so I would say that is a big thing, is consistency, hard work, and having fun. Making it fun is how you're going to be able to, keep going, because there's no reason to do anything if you're not having fun with it. We're not, here for, your life is short, and if you're not having fun at something, if you're consistently not having fun at something, then it's the time to look for something else. Being able to recognize that this is something that you really enjoy, and there may be periods of it that aren't fun, that's something that you have to be able to get over. But long term, like if this is something that you really enjoy, you have to make sure that you're headed in the right direction, and that this is the right thing for you.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So many people are like, well, I have to do this. I'm like, no, you don't. You don't have to. You can. I'm like, it's. I think people forget to play still, like to have fun, right? I mean,
right.
Like back to the video game thing. It's like, I mean, I played I played video games for like the first time in a while. recently, and I forgot how much fun it is.
Right.
And I'm like, man, I wish you could just do other stuff that was this much fun. It sounds like you've kind of found that with jiu-jitsu, or you've said there's an analogy between playing the joy you got out of playing games and jiu-jitsu.
Right, and I think, a lot of the times people get on this hamster wheel of, whatever their current situation is, and they're saying, okay, I'm gonna keep doing this because this is what I did yesterday.
Yeah.
And being able to recognize that, one of my favorite quotes is from Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, is that you wanna begin with the end in mind. So you wanna make sure that your goals are, your long-term goals, the reason that that you exist, are going to be consistent with your daily practices. So if your long-term goal is to get better at jiu-jitsu, then every day you should be doing something to help you get better with jiu-jitsu. If your ultimate goal is to have a successful relationship, then you should be doing things every day in your daily life that are leading towards that ultimate goal. And I think a lot of the times people just kind of fall into rhythms and routines because, oh man, it's easy for me to go get some Casey's Pizza on the way to work. It's way quicker than me getting up a little bit earlier. But is this ultimately, going to lead to me achieving my goal of having a healthy body? So I think that's really important. And I think it's important to be able to embrace that grind of like, okay, I have to do this every day. But it's also important to be able to take a step back and say, is this what I want to be doing?
Yeah.
And so, a lot of the times in jiu-jitsu, it becomes very obvious very quickly. That spark happens and they fall in love with it.
Right. Yeah, and I'm thinking too about, like me personally, I have the I could call it like, I don't even know what to call it, but it's like, have you ever seen that movie Up? When the dog is like a squirrel and he runs off. I get like that with stuff, and then so I'm probably practicing the 10,000 kicks versus the one kick 10,000 times, and I noticed that as I do that and I bring more stuff on, the amount of time I have for like downtime and recharging and almost like thinking about things strategically versus like just executing goes down. Do you see that happening in jiu-jitsu as well, or is that an issue with people where they just kind of almost overload a little bit?
You definitely can. I think the real theme from what you just said, though, is the ability to have that introspection, right? So, different people have different, mental holes that they fall into, right? Where you're going from one direction to another direction. If you can recognize that, then it's easier to solve that problem on the mats, right? You can tell yourself like, oh, I'm thinking this thing because this is a pattern of thought that I normally have. I'm thinking, okay, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to go here, versus, maybe the best thing to do right now is nothing, right? To stay in this spot or to keep doing exactly what I'm doing. A lot of the times, so for me, like one of my like mental traps that I fall into is paralysis by analysis. So I don't want to take a step forward until I've researched the optimal way to step forward. And had I done that with jiu-jitsu, I would have never started jiu-jitsu because there wasn't a world champion black belt in Iowa that would be able to spoon feed me the best jiu-jitsu from the Holy Grail, And so. And so I recognize that, and so a lot of the times, like, I just have to force myself to go do it anyway. I don't get to think about it, or at least I have to start doing it before I reevaluate, is this the optimal way to do it?
Yeah.
I have students that, their thought pattern leads to a lot of different situations, and I think the ability to be able to be introspective about that is a really fundamental skill that transcends time on the mat and in every aspect of life.
Yeah, I was getting interviewed once and I said this, and I got like a shock reaction from the person, but I was like, man, because we were talking about, I don't even know what it was. They asked me for like a piece of advice, and I was like, you know what? I'm like, just go suck at something for as long as possible, because that's like the only way you get to be good at it. Like I picked up dancing a couple years ago. And it was salsa dancing, and I was terrible.
Right.
And I had a personal trainer at the time, and I would practice in between sets, just because I was like, what else am I gonna do? He's like checking on other people, and so I'd like practice my footwork. And he's like, oh man, that's nice, you're doing the robot? And I'm like, God damn. I'm like, Hopefully he watches this and gets a nice laugh out of it, because I was just like, no, it was supposed to be like a finesse move, but it's like, and then eventually people are like, oh wow, you're going to be pretty good. But I'm like, I had to suck for a really long time before, and I'm not even good now. I'm okay, like I can do it and not feel like I look like a fool. But
Right.
I feel like that's a common thread that you're kind of saying right now too, is you kind of have to be okay with sucking and maybe getting your ass kicked a little bit.
Yeah, so that's, and I think that's true of anything that's difficult to do. Anybody that's able to achieve mastery at anything that's difficult, you're gonna suck for a while. And usually what happens is you start doing this thing and you're like, wow, this is really engaging. But the amount of work that it takes to get better, you have just no idea how hard it is to get better at it. So many things in society are just really easy and user-friendly, right? Like being able to drive a car is pretty easy, right? Imagine if you had to do you had to build a car to be able to drive it, right?
Yeah.
Nobody would do it. With Jiu-Jitsu, there's a very steep learning curve and you pay a price during that learning curve, right? So in Jiu-Jitsu, what ends up happening is, your first day you get really excited, you get all these endorphins, you're rolling around with other people, and then you start getting stuck and they start basically beating you up. They do what Jiu-Jitsu's for. And every time, you might learn a move in class, but to be able to bridge that gap from being able to learn a move to be able to do a move against a resisting opponent is a huge chasm to cross. And in the meantime, your face is getting smashed, somebody's laying on you, you're in uncomfortable positions. So a lot of the times I'll find that we have people that, everyone sucked. And a lot of the times people will go through these plateaus where they're like, man, I'm not getting any better. This guy, he started with me or he started after me and he's starting to beat me up. And Jiu-Jitsu sucks. And then if they stick with it, usually then they get to eventually be the hammer. And so I would say that's one of the hardest things is not only is it a bunch of weird movements to be able to effectively move around on the ground, usually, outside of when you were a baby, you're usually not on the floor doing stuff, right? So being able to effectively move on the ground is this weird situation. And then on top of it, if you do something wrong, you're paying the price by getting smashed, by getting choked, by getting armbarred. That I would say is probably the hardest aspect of Jiu-Jitsu, is to be able to keep the faith, to recognize that your hard work will eventually pay off.
Yeah. Is there anything that you tell students when they're in that plateau to help to keep them moving forward?
I could probably stand to be a little bit more encouraging, I guess. I definitely do. I do my best to encourage them. A lot of the times their peers do a little bit more of that than I do. And you kind of have to recognize the little victories. So, you may not win a match, right? So you may not, you go and you roll around with somebody for 4 minutes and you may have lost or gotten tapped or pinned, 7 times. But if you did the one move that you were trying to do and you did that correctly, then that later on, maybe you're going to be able to do that twice. And then when you're effectively able to string together a lot of these moves that are going to be new to you, down the road, that's going to pay a lot of dividends. So I think that that's important. And then it's also, I think, really important, and I had this mentality coming up through the ranks, was that the reason that I'm losing is I just don't know enough, right? It's not like if I lost, I never really got that upset. Even when I lost in competition, I never really got that upset. It's like, okay, this person knows more stuff than me. My goal is to keep learning more stuff, and when I learn more stuff, I'm going to be able to beat them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, learning plus repetition, though, too.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
And being able to do it against a resisting
yes,
opponent.
Yeah. Not to get too technical.
Right.
But, so I have one more question before we wrap up the first part of the interview, and that is, why should someone do Jiu-Jitsu?
For me, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been the best thing that's happened in my life. It's this awesome outlet where I get to meet really cool, interesting people that I would normally never get to interact with. Like I said, I have doctors, I have lawyers, I have people running huge companies, and I have high school students. I have this awesome place that bridges social capital, and it's just this amazing environment. Not only that, you have an opportunity to lose weight in something that's like, it's like playing a video game, or at least in my head, it's like playing a video game. You get to have fun, play this game with your body, and you like also start to get fit during it. So it can be an awesome way to lose weight. And then I haven't really talked about it too much because honestly, it wasn't my reason for getting into it. But jiu-jitsu is really, really, like I would say, the best martial art to be able to learn effective, safe self-defense. It's real, it's battle tested. This isn't some snake oil where I'm gonna show you a 5-finger death punch. This is stuff that works, and it's stuff that legitimately could save your life if you were in that situation. For me, that's not why I keep training. I enjoy the community, I enjoy the competition, I enjoy making people better in the environment. But there's so many reasons to start training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and you owe it to yourself at least to see if you get hooked. Because if you start training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, your life's only going to get better.
I feel like that needs to be on a poster. Well, that kind of wraps up the first part of our interview. So I just have three questions, and then we can wrap it up. Awesome. So first one, what do you try to do on a daily basis to kind of make your day a win?
It's kind of crazy for me. So I'm kind of in a transition period where I had a full-time plus job in addition to owning a gym, and competing and all of that stuff. So it's been all of 3 days, so I'm trying to figure it out. But for me, it's hard to sleep at night if I didn't put in work. Every day I want to do something, like I think you should do something physical every day. You should work out every day. That doesn't mean that you go to exhaustion every day, but you need to move your body every day and feel like you accomplished things. So for me, like I at the very least, I have to feel like I've made some type of accomplishment and tried to tackle some goal, whether it's physical, whether it's mental, whether it's, going to the DMV. I mean, that's usually the one that I'll kick the can on the longest. So for me, it's I have to, be chasing my goals. Yeah.
Most impactful book that you've read?
There are a couple. So I mentioned the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think that's a really good one. A lot of themes that help me prioritize what things I'm focusing on and make sure that I'm kind of pointing myself in the right direction. There's a book called A Season on the Mat that was written about Dan Gable's wrestling team that was a fascinating approach into the psyche of combat athletes in a highly competitive arena and what it takes, to have that success across the board, as you get to see the perspective of the coach and the athletes. And I think it's a phenomenal read for anybody that's interested in obsession and success at a high level in a high stakes environment in athletics. I think that's a phenomenal book. My last one is A Fighter's Heart. So it was written by Sam Sheridan. He got an art degree from Harvard and then decided that he wanted to be a fighter. So he moved down to the Quad Cities and trained at Militage Fighting Systems, took an amateur fight, and then kind of became engrossed with the fight culture, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So he went kind of all around the world, chasing, high-level instructors in all of mixed martial arts.
So this has been a fascinating interview for me. I feel like I've learned a ton, and I'm seeing a lot of crossover between everything that you're talking about in Jiu-Jitsu, plus compared to business and art and some other areas. So I guess the last question I have for you is, what message would you like to leave the audience with today?
Over my tenure in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I think kind of the biggest thing is that you're capable of a lot more than you think you are. And you're not going to be able to find that out unless you work really, really hard. There's a really an interesting guy who does, he's like a survivalist, does ultra marathons and hunting and crazy stuff. And he has this phrase that says, "Nobody cares, work harder." A guy named Cameron Haynes. And I think that's a really beautiful message. And it shows, that not only, it shows that the way that you meet your potential is, through hard work and through adversity. And if there's anything that I've learned from jiu-jitsu, it's, I feel like I've uncovered so much more of my potential than I probably ever would have had I not gone through the process and the journey that is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, that is a wrap for this show. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Trevor Carlson, and I appreciate you taking the time to stop by, and whether it's viewing our episodes or listening to our podcasts or reading our blog posts, all of you guys really help keep this show going. So I much appreciate your time and attention, and hopefully we provided a little bit of value for you. Now, if you're interested and you think you might enjoy getting some blog posts, emails, other podcasts, guides, any of that sort of thing sent to your inbox every week, go ahead and head over to theformulapodcast.com and sign up for our email list today. That's a wrap for this week's show. Thanks again, everyone, for stopping by, and I look forward to you tuning in next time.